All right, I will speak first before the professor. I believe that the professor will have a sober approach to this. For me, it's a very emotional topic. I even don't know if I'm the correct person to be sitting here. That's why I even had to turn down the invitation for dinner. And yeah, sorry for over introducing myself. I should have just said that I'm a lecturer at the University of the Free State and left it there. But this is a wonderful film. It's a pity that the producer is not here. Otherwise, I had a few direct questions to her. I hope she gets access to this and maybe we can chew up one together. But yeah, thanks to her and everyone else involved in the film for telling our story. Very few people have told it and gotten heard. I don't know what the audience would have been like in Zim. I'm not being very confident about this gathering here, but the state, being the state, has a way of sending people. So I don't know, maybe one of you here might be from the States. But what I enjoyed most about this story is that it's told from a non-obvious point of view. Most stories discuss the cause and effect, what caused this, and then how did it go, and so on and so on. But this one approaches the story of Chris from a family perspective, from a maybe even metaphysical perspective, where he's looking for peace, maybe even a family setup type of peace. It's not our usual historical approach of cause and effect. And I think the film is very strong in that one. The issue of relationships between the living and even the dead, which plays a significant role in our society. My name speaks for itself, But it also touches on something that affects most of us foreigners in this, even in this gathering, the idea of migration, forced migration, most of the time when you're running away to save your life, It's quite ironic. Robert Mugabe once said, I think it was in a SADC meeting, that people from Matabeleland come to South Africa without passports and commit crimes. But right now his son, is languishing in some jail. Told he's also an illegal immigrant, whatever. But yeah, I don't know how to interpret that. Yeah, when I watched this film first, I didn't hear the word Gukurahundi being mentioned, but I believe that is important to name the devil. So when I watched it for the second time, I was happy to see it being mentioned. Most people usually sugarcoat this and, they talk about the so-called Matabeleland disturbances. Even the advert for this film calls it a massacre. It's not a massacre, it's a genocide. A massacre is something that happens, when you find people sitting here and then you just kill all of us indiscriminately. That's a massacre. But if we are going to identify and say this type of people stand on one side and then we shoot you, it becomes a genocide. So maybe this should, but look, I'm not saying that the producer should produce another film, but maybe in the advertisement, which is where it calls itself massacre, maybe that can be revisited, It's also timely that this film comes out when the government of Zimbabwe, ironically, also is championing an outreach program to try and bring closure to this thing. But the state is the perpetrator, so we've got a compromise situation where the referee is also playing in the game. By the way, the people who were active are still in power in Zimbabwe today. They just say it was Mugabe, but the real people are there. I don't know a single person. I do, but I will not name them. I do know one person who was involved in the real killing, a mutual friend. But otherwise, until we know those people, we will never get real closure. And then I've got a few more points, one or two. Yeah, the film also acknowledges the role of social justice groups like Sharia Pearl and their role in trying to solve this issue of Gukurahundi and especially reburials, Although on that same topic, I'm not quite sure I enjoyed the parading of the skull. It didn't sound like something that I have seen in all the burials that I have seen in my life. It doesn't happen like that. But then again, we can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. It's a great film. In short, I would just like to say, in as much as the film gives us a sense that there is closure to this issue, the truth is that there is no closure. But then, of course, the film producer was telling her own story. Gukurahundi story is very broad, and they couldn't have told everything in those 112, 117 minutes now, so maybe these stories have been told elsewhere and have not been screened or, gotten an audience as lovely as this one, but for now, I think I can leave it here and hand it over to the professor, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moyo, and thank you for being straightforward and bringing out that aspect of Gukurahundi. I think it's extremely important, and even if you think the very naming of what happened and its symbolic significance, I think I'm going to speak a bit more to that. When we were given this film to watch in advance, I also had the chance to search who exactly is this person, and I got to know that it actually took at least 7 years for this film to be produced. I think it is obvious it's a personal story of Chris and Tumi, and there are issues here of love that do come out, but I think the most important, it has to do with the unfinished business of justice to the people of Matabeleland. I think here, if one goes through the films, one sees or try to extrapolate a compelling exploration of the contemporary tragedy of Zimbabwe and how it offers at least a profound meditation on grief, including the phenomenon of delayed or deferred mourning. If you think that someone has to wait for close to more than 40 years for them to bury their parents, I think it's one of the key tragedy we are experiencing right now in Zimbabwe. Closely related to that in terms of the tragedy, it has to do with, and Dr. Moyo has already mentioned, the themes of migration and the enduring longing for home, as well as the complexities of family, parenthood, and interpersonal. I think for us, the majority here, some of us, we do not know some of the context that led to some of the tragedy in Matabeleland. We have to, sorry, I'm now going into a bit of history here as a historian, but I think we have to think about the tragedy of African politics, and especially the issue of tribalism. And when you think of the rise of African nationalism and in Zimbabwe, and of course it's continued, how it was continued, crushed or banned, especially when it comes to political parties, including the National Democratic Party, that then led to the formation of ZAPU, with Joshua Nkomo as the leader. But we know, as historians, in 1963, the split and the formation of ZANU, the breakaway of a group of mainly Shona people, and split and formation of ZANU PF, which predominantly became Shona, and its consequences had far-reaching consequences not only in the execution of the liberation struggle, but also in post-colonial politics, and I will explain a bit more about that when it comes to, especially one wants to put the Gukurahundi in its post-colonial context and the tragedy of post-colonial politics in Zimbabwe. I think it's a tragedy of colonial violence, considering that in part it was the failure of the colonial government to hand over power that led to the liberation struggle, which was very violent. And it seems the people of Matabeleland from the 60s up to the 1987, they actually did not or hadn't experienced peace. It has been violence after another. You do have colonial violence from the 60s, but mostly in the 70s. And of course, post-colonial violence from 82, 83 onwards until 87, when I think Joshua Nkomo realized that if he does not agree to a settlement, there is a possibility of this violence continuing and more people in Matabeleland dying. It is also a tragedy of the limits of post-colonial state building that is shaped by narrow politics, narrow nationalist politics which prioritized consolidation of a one-party state. And I think within that film, there is a narration of, we see Mugabe and Nkomo sitting. And even if you see how they're sitting, it's a very uncomfortable kind of, they do have uncomfortable postures in terms of sitting. And this actually led to the marginalization of alternative nationalist visions. And I think even if you want to think of the weakening of democratic foundations in current day Zimbabwe, you have to go to this time period. Coming to post-colonial state-sanctioned violence, I think we should, as Dr. Moyo has really mentioned, say it as it is. It is Gukurahundi. It is, and I do agree with him here, a genocide. In the sense that I think for all those scholars who have done in terms of genocide, or scholars of genocide, they've been if you think of genocide, it's a deliberate attempt of exterminating a particular people based on, in other parts, sometimes in terms of their ethnicity. If one goes through various speeches of Mugabe, the intentionality is there. Even if one looks at, for instance, the 1985, already the violence taking place in Matabeleland, but if one goes to the 1985 elections, in one of the rallies, actually, Mugabe actually speak about the need, quote unquote, weed out people who supported ZAPU, and mainly, if you want to think of it in terms of people from Matabeleland and Midlands. And whilst I do come from Manicaland, which is in the eastern districts, there are cases of family friends who were actually evicted from, during the 1985 elections, were evicted from council houses because they were Ndebele and they supported ZAPU. So it's, if you want to think of it, it's a tragedy of post-colonial state-sanctioned violence, where we have close to 20,000 deaths, widespread torture, forced disappearance, sexual violence, and displacement of thousands of civilians. And I think if you think of, in terms of the impact, is still very much felt within Matabeleland and Midlands province, which include displacement and sometimes long-term political marginalization. It is I think what also comes out of this conversation of this film, it has to do with the issue of delayed justice on victims of Gukurahundi. I've already mentioned that if you think of that, 40 years now, someone is still trying to bury their parents, and they have to be extremely careful. If you think of the conversation between Sherry Apple and Chris in terms of is this what your government, sorry, not government, what your family really wants? It actually means they have to be strong, because there's a possibility of the government interfering or trying to stop such kind of rebellions. It is actually a contradiction, actually, that the government right now has not done so much in trying to heal Matabeleland, in trying to push for reburials. And yet at the same time, and I think during, if I'm not mistaken, the period between 2013 and 2017, the government did an effort in terms of reburials of the people who died during the liberation struggle, and especially in Mashonaland, in provinces, Mashonaland East, Mashonaland West, and some parts of Manicaland. And this was really paraded on national TV, yet we do not have this taking place within Matabeleland. I think it also, I'm about to finish, the issue of the economic crisis and the Zimbabwean diaspora that has forced so many into the diaspora. And of course, the makeshift existence of these people within the diaspora. If you think of how the documentary highlights the precarious and makeshift existence of experience by many migrants, often struggling with to secure long-term employment, leaving them vulnerable, being undocumented. The case of a child indicating that they can't go to school because they're undocumented. Of course, there's the issue of failure to pay fees. And of course, there's the issue of longing for home, and especially for migrants, that even when you're in the diaspora, you're always thinking of home. Last but not the least, I think, which did put a smile on my face, it has to do with the love story of Chris and Dumi, and I'm really glad that at least from this documentary, the final say is that they're engaged. I think it also demonstrates that wherever people go, irrespective of their troubles, of their longings for home, they always find love. And I think it's really a very nice thing. Thank you.